Today's daf we're going to be learning today is Kiddushin Membet. Shavua Tov to everybody, and Gemara Chatima Tova. The daf for Yom Kippur will go up very shortly after today's Shiur. This week's learning is sponsored by Jennifer Baumer in honor of Rabbanit Michelle. As we approach the halfway mark in the daf Yomi cycle, I do not think I would have made it past Eruvin without her insightful and patient daily teaching. Kol hakavod to everyone who has made it this far. Today's daf is also sponsored by Debbie Pine in loving memory of her mother, Florence Pine, Fega Bat Moshe Mordechai V'Sara Rivka, on her third yahrzeit. Presence is sorely missed every day, and especially during the Chagim. Yehi Zichra Baruch. We're going to get started. We're going to continue with our issue of shlichut. First, so today we're talking in the beginning of the daf. We're going to have three basic topics today. So the first is going to be about shlichut. We learned that a person can do something in place of somebody else, be their messenger. So we saw in yesterday's daf all sorts of proofs for this. So now the Gemara is going to say we needed a combination of three different proofs. If you remember, one was about kodashim. So the one about kodashim came from the Korban Pesach. So now the Gemara is going to ask the following question, which is Hanicha Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, 4 lines from the bottom of Mem Aleph on the bet. This makes perfect sense for Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who uses that drasha from the Korban Pesach, Shachatu Kol Kahal, right? The one person did the shlichut for the people, which shows you have shlichut here. Shachatu Kol Kahal Adat Yisrael Ben Arbaim, which we said it clearly can't be the entire Kahal does the shlichut. It must be one person does it on behalf of others. So from there you learn lots of shlichut. But that's according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who learns that pasuk in that way. But Rabbi Yonatan, Rabbi Yonatan needs that pasuk for a different drasha, in which case menalan. So where does he get shlichut from? So what we need to learn now is, first of all, we need to know what does Rabbi Yonatan learn from that pasuk. Then we'll try to figure out where does he learn shlichut from. Rabbi Yonatan omer, minayin shekol Yisrael yotzim bepesach echad. Normally what happens with the Korban Pesach is everybody joins a group, you register for that group, you have to be registered before the slaughtering, somebody slaughters it, and then doesn't even have to be, by the way, someone in the group. That's the whole thing of shlichut. And then you all eat the Korban Pesach, and you have to, all of you together eat, everyone needs to eat at least a kazayit, and you need to eat the Korban Pesach. So now they say, besides the sacrificing of the sacrifice and bringing the blood on the altar, now they say the following. What if we only have one animal for the entire Jewish community? So, in fact, if that's the case, you can do one for everybody, even though obviously not everyone's going to eat the meat. So Rashi points out this shows you that the eating is not the critical element. And as long as the blood is spilled, you can fulfill the Pesach sacrifice. And that's what Rabbi Yonatan learns from this pasuk. Shneimar, v'shachatu oto kol kahal adat Yisrael ben ha'arbayim. V'chi kol hakahal kulam shechatim, halo ein shochet ela echad. Now, he does the exact same thing that the first person did, Rabbi Yonatan ben Korcha did. We asked the same question. It doesn't make any sense that the entire community is doing the shlichut here. Only one person is shochet. But instead of learning from here that one is shochet on behalf of everybody else in terms of learning the laws of shlichut, he says, Mikan shekol Yisrael yotzim bepesach echad. From here you can see that the whole kahal could actually fulfill their mitzvah with one korban only. So shaliach b'kodashim minalei. So where does he get shlichut b'kodashim? To which they say, what do you mean? Minei. You can learn it from that same source. If the whole community can bring one Pesach, then that means that one person is slaughtering on behalf of everyone. So in the end, you learn also the same thing as Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, which is that one person can slaughter on behalf of other people, which means there's loss of shlichut in sacrifices. But the Gemara doesn't like this answer and says, V'dil mashane hatam di'ile shutafut begavayu. They're all part owners of the korban. Before when Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said it, he meant a random person can come and slaughter my Korban Pesach. Let's say in our group, we don't have a shochet, someone who knows how to do this. So somebody else will do it for us. Anyway, normally the Kohanim did it, but it was a unique thing on Pesach that the Israelim could do this shlichut, but it's not even clear that they actually practically did it. Okay, they're allowed to. I don't know really who did it. It's very likely some Kohen who was used to doing this kind of thing did the slaughtering. But the point is, in general, shlichut could be done by anybody. I think there is reason to believe that people actually did slaughter their own Korban Pesach, as opposed to other Korbanot, which probably unlikely. In general, a non-Kohen can do shlichut. But anyway, the point being that first source, the first way we understood the source was to teach you one could slaughter on behalf of someone else that's not in this group. But in this case, we have one slaughtering on behalf of the entire community. And if the korban is working for everybody, then everybody's a partner in it. So if one partner does something for other partners, that's not shlichut. That's you're doing it for yourself and me all together. You're doing it. That's a whole different thing. That's not shlichut. That's not I asked you to do something for me, only for me, or only for my group of people. So you can't learn it from there. Okay, so they try another source. We're going to have 3 attempts to understand where he gets it from. The first was from this pasuk itself. That didn't work. The second is to say alamehacha. And in the end, by the way, we're going to go back to the second. Okay, the second's going to be the one, but we're going to raise a problem with the second one and then move to a third one. But in the end, this will be it. Alamehacha. There's another pasuk. What does it say? Vayikhu lahem ish seh lebeit avot. They brought, this is the general korban Pesach. It says they took, a man took a seh, an animal, libeit avot, for his family. Seh labayit. Okay, this, by the way, means a seh for the household. Or, by the way, it means for anyone who was registered for that sacrifice. So yikhu, we already know, we've learned it in this chapter, means he acquired, meaning he buys the animal or gets the animal on behalf of everybody. So what do you see here? He can buy it for everybody. So there you have again, shlichut. But it's not really shlichut because but again, they're all partners. He's one of them. It's not like someone's betrothing, getting me betrothed to my husband for me without having anything for them. No, we're all partners in this korban. So one person in the group is buying it on behalf of all of us. That's not shlichut. By the way, that's din zechia. We're going to talk about zechia later. That's where I can acquire something, and then it can be acquired for you as well. Now, zechia also doesn't need to happen only when we're in a group. But in this case, it would be one acquires it on behalf of all the other people. Connection between shlichut and zechia is there's a lot written about it because they're somewhat connected, but not exactly. We'll get back to zechia later. To which they say, well, wait. If this has shutafut, and it's showing that one can buy on behalf of his group, where they're all part of the same group and they all are part owners, and the previous pasuk was telling us one can slaughter on behalf of the entire Jewish people when we're all partners in this, well, in kain trei krai lamali, you don't need 2 psukim to tell you the exact same idea. So what principle do we use here? Ime no inyan. You remember the ime no inyan? Ime no inyan means if it's not brought in the Torah for this purpose, because we already know it from a different pasuk, then it must be teaching us something else. So, if it's not teaching you that one can do it on behalf of others when you're all part of it together and partners in it, then it must be teaching you can even do it on behalf of someone else when you're not partners, and that's the din of shlichut. So this, in the end, is going to be our source for Rabbi Yonatan, but the Gemara is going to try to raise a problem with it and say, wait a minute. You want to learn from ish seh lebeit avot? That pasuk is used by Rabbi Yitzchak for a different drasha, and therefore can't be used for this. To Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, and here we get to zechia. Ish zoche v'lo katan zoche. What does it say here? One person bought on behalf of everybody else. So as I said before, that's kind of more like zechia than shlichut, which is one is buying it, and with that, he's acquiring it on behalf of all the other people in the group. We talked about zechia also when it came to eruv, right? You can put down food for the eruv for all the people living here, even though they don't. Right? First of all, we learned zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, right? But you would be mizakeh other people. They would do it with their children, if you remember. They would use their children to be mizakeh, and then there was a whole problem because only grown-ups could be mizakeh, not kids. And then one explanation was they were older children. But anyway, they would give it to the older children and say, you acquire this on behalf of everybody in the eruv, the area where we want to do the eruv. So anyway, that's how zechia works. So now they want to say, Ish zoche v'lo katan zoche. Notice it says ish in the pasuk. Ish is a man, meaning a grown man, not a child, which means a grown man can do zechia, can acquire a gift on your behalf. By the way, you can do zechia by, in this case, where one is acquiring it for everybody and that person is part of the group. You can also do zechia for someone else. You can accept a gift on behalf of someone else, as long as it's in their best interest. That's zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. You can acquire a gift for someone if they're not there, but Right? You can't take on a financial responsibility, do something that's bad for them. If they're not there, they have to agree to it. But to do something good for you, I could do if you're not there. So anyway, who can do this? A grown person, not a minor. And that's what Ish is doing in that pasuk. That's what that pasuk is teaching you. To which they say, no. That's not learned from here. That's learned from somewhere else. Okay? And that is going to then free up. Remember, there's 3 pasukim. We started with the one person, right? The whole community slaughtered the Pesach, which we in the end said, according to Rabbi Yonatan, is that the whole community can be yotzei with one korban Pesach. Doesn't teach about shlichut. That was the one Rabbi Yishua ben Korcha used. The second was Ish, vayikulahem Ish sel lebeit avot. One person bought it on behalf of the group. Since we don't need that to teach you group, because the previous one was group, it must be teaching you one can buy on behalf of a different person. What about this law about Ish zocheh and lo katan zocheh? And it specifically says Ish to teach you only a grown person can acquire something on your behalf. Well, that's learned from a 3rd pasuk in this section. Hahul be Ish lefi ochlo nafka. Okay, Ish lefi ochlo tachosu alaseh means, really the pshat means they would gather in groups, right? Ish according to what they could eat, meaning the group was kind of divided by tachosu alaseh. They would slaughter the Pesach. Tachosu, they explain means slaughtering. They would slaughter the lamb for everybody who could eat in that group, okay, for the group. So Ish in that pasuk, they say, comes to teach you that an Ish is zocheh for others and not a katan. But they say, wait, you want to use pasuk number 3 for that drasha, which would then leave pasuk number 2 open and available. But that pasuk number 3 is used for a different drasha, which means it's not available, which means we're going to throw back Ish zocheh v'lo katan zocheh in pasuk 2, and we want a pasuk 2 available to teach us the laws of shlichut. To which they say, oh no. First, okay, they're going to reject that, but wait, I'm still on the pasuk. There's a different halacha we learn from Ish lefi ochlo tachosu alaseh. Now there it seems to say, right, the way the simple reading is, one person, right, it's slaughtered on behalf of Ish lefi ochlo, on behalf of how many people, right, are in the group that are going to eat it. But it also, notice it says Ish in singular. So it sounds like you don't have to have a group for a korban pesach. You can even slaughter a korban on behalf of one person. Okay, even though you might not have thought that, but you can do it on behalf of one person. And then that pasuk is teaching you that halacha, and it's not teaching you Ish zocheh v'lo katan zocheh. Ish is coming to teach you Ish in singular. One person, you could slaughter a korban pesach for one person only. Okay, so this whole thing of groups, it's not like you have to eat in a group. You could do it in as an individual, and yes. So the problem is, if you do it as an individual, you'd have to be an individual who could eat the whole animal. Okay, it would have to be, let's say, a small one that you could manage to eat yourself, and a person who could actually eat all that. Anyway, because it has to be eaten within a certain period of time. So now, right, by that evening. So now they say, don't worry about that. This is all a question according to Rabbi Yonatan. So we could just say Rabbi Yonatan doesn't hold by that halacha. It's a machloket, whether you can do a korban pesach for an individual or not. And therefore, he just doesn't think that you could actually do that. In which case, okay, and this is what the chart shows you. The chart shows you on the page on the study guide for today, the study guide, the chart shows you the drashot you learn from each one according to the conclusion of the Gemara. Okay, so again, pasuk number 1 taught you that everyone could be yotzei with one pesach. That was the kol hakahal. The last pasuk, Ish lefi ochlo, teaches you only a grown person can be mizakeh, someone else takes something on their behalf, accepts something on their behalf, but not a child. And the middle pasuk, Ish sel lebeit avot, the one would buy on behalf of the others, teaches you about shlichut and kodashim. And even though it's b'shutafut, they're all owners together. Well, since the previous pasuk taught that, then therefore the second one taught that as well. It's teaching you something else. Okay, so the first one is teaching you shutafut. The second one is teaching you even if you're not partners. That's the first section of today. Now we're still talking about shlichut. Before we are going to get off topic a little bit, we have our sources from yesterday, from where we learned shlichut from. Now we have a problem because Elahada Amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav Gidol quoted Rav is saying, Minayin sheshlucho shel adam kamoto. He asked the exact same question that we've been asking. How do you know that the shaliach functions like the person himself? Meaning, you can send a shaliach to do things for you, to do mitzvot even. Shene'emal nasi echad mimateh. What is this? When they distributed the land, how did they distribute the land? Each nasi, the head of each shevet, of each tribe, came and basically got the land for his tribe. So what do you see here? Shlichut, he was a messenger of all the other people. So the first question against Rav is, typically shlichut mehacha. Why didn't he learn shlichut from the other psukim we saw? And secondly, it's a weird pasuk to learn shlichut from. Why? And again, we're getting back to another problem here. Tizbara dahash shlichutu v'haktanim la b'nei shlichut ninu. But wait, minors can't appoint a shaliach. If I can't do something myself, I can't appoint a shaliach to do it. So a minor can't appoint shlichim. And there were clearly minors who were getting nachala. They were dividing it up among everybody, including a situation, let's say there were no parents for that family and he was a minor, so he would get his own land. So basically, we have two questions with Rav. Why, and again, it's Rav Gidol who quoted in the name of Rav, is saying, we learn shlichut from this pasuk about the chalukat nachala. Number one, why didn't we learn from the other pasukim we had? And number two, how can you say shlichut if the minors can't make, the nasi couldn't function as a shaliach for the minors in the group? So therefore they say, okay, we must have misunderstood what Rav Gidol said in the name of Rav. Elaki hade Rabba bar Rav Huna to Amar Rabba bar. Okay, so it must be understood the way Rabba bar Rav Huna passed it down. To Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Gidol, Amar Rav. So Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, passed down what Rav Gidol said in the name of Rav differently than we had it previously. So, minayin, and now this is why I said we're going to get back to Zechia. Minayin shezachim la'adam shelo b'fanav. This halacha I mentioned just before, that I can acquire something on your behalf if it's good for you. Where do we learn that from? Shene'emal v'nasi echad, nasi echad. We learned that halacha from here. Okay, by the way, this sugya is going to have three also like last part, which is we're going to, first we understood Rav is thinking he learned shlichut from there. Now we're going to think that he learns zachim la'adam shelo b'fanav from there, but in the end we're going to reject that and learn something else and say that we're really Rav Gidol said in the name of Rav was something different. Okay, but now we're on the second. So now, from the fact that the Nisiim got the Nachala for everybody, what do you see? They were Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. They acquired something on behalf of somebody else, even though they weren't there, right? They didn't stand next to their entire tribe when they were doing this. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute, okay, imagine the scene, right? The Nasi comes back and says, you got this piece, you got that piece, you got that piece, you got that piece. You can imagine what happened the next minute, right? This one's screaming, I don't want that one. I want that. I want that. You gave me a bad piece. So this wasn't a law of zachin. Zachin is always when it's good for a person. This isn't necessarily good for everybody. It could be bad for you, the part that you got. Some people want the bik'ah, the valley, and they got the mountains. And some people would prefer the mountains and they got the valley. So this can't teach you zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. Ela k'derive bar Rav Huna. So now they reshift what Rabbi bar Rav Huna says and said, okay, I guess you're right. It couldn't be what he said. See, they're having issues with the transmission of what the wording was. The Amar Rabbi bar Rav Huna Amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav minayin liyitomim shebao lachloch b'nisei avihem. How do you know that when there's orphans, okay, this is what you learn from the Nisiim, that when there's orphans who come to distribute the property of their father and they're too young, okay, so how do we know that the beitin can appoint an apitropos to do whether it's good for them or whether it's bad for them, either which way, right? They have this apitropos who decides which portion they're getting for good or for bad. So first they stop this in the middle and they say, lachov amai. Why would you have an apitropos who's going to do bad for the children? Ela lachov amanat liskot. In other words, it might look bad, but they're really doing it for the good. In other words, it might not look like this is what you want. Basically, Rashi explains what this means is anu namidenu ladun ula'ar'er b'shvilam lizchutam ulahanaatan v'im yitchayvu badim ma she'asu asu. What it means is that the apitropos, each child in the family, has their own apitropos who is going to go out to bat for them and try to get what's good. In the end, it might be bad for them and they'll have to live with it. But at least the job of the apitropos is to try to get the good for them. Okay, and then accept it on their behalf if they end up with the bad part, okay, or with some section that they think isn't good. Okay, but basically what we're saying is that the Nisiim, okay, to now continue, that was just a break to ask this question, back to this, what he said, Talmud Lamal, we learn from here, Nasiacha mimateh tikchu. So from the fact that the Nisiim did it on behalf of others, we learn from here that the Beitin can appoint an apitropos for each of the Yitomim to try to get what was good for them. This means the Nisiim, tried to do what was good for everybody. Maybe in the end they didn't succeed, but that's their job. Okay, so in that you learn from the Yitomim. So in the end, again, review of this section. We brought a statement of Rav Gidel in the name of Rav. We quoted Rav as saying, how do we know shlichut shel adam kamoto? We learned it from Nasi Echad. We had two problems. Number one, why didn't he learn from the other sources that we saw yesterday? Number two, can't be din shlichut because there's minors there, to which we suggested maybe it's just teaching you zachin adam shel b'fanav, but then we said that getting the land is not necessarily a zchut. Many people probably were very unhappy with the part they got, or some people might have been. And then we said, fine, it teaches you about orphans, okay? And that the orphans have this apitropos who's there to kind of go out to bat for them to try to get what's best for them. But in the end, if they don't get what's best for them, that's final, because that's what was decided. And that's what we learned from Nasi Echad. So you get what you get in the end, the Nasi maybe tried his best, but you get what you get. Again, even though it's a little bit weird because in the Nasiim obviously it wasn't a case of orphans, but that's what they learned from there. Now, since we talked about orphans and apitropsim, now we're going to have a whole sugya that we actually saw a lot of this in Gitin, so it's a repeat. Now we'll learn it a little more in depth than we learned it then. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. So now we're on the side, and at the end of the daf, we'll get back to shlichut, messengers. Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. So Rav Nachman, it's very important to note, he's quoting Shmuel here. Usually that means he holds that way, but in a minute we're going to say, but Rav Nachman himself did not hold this way. So here he just quotes Shmuel. Yitomim shabao lachlok b'nichsei avihem, beitim amidim lahem apitropos. Okay, this everyone agrees with. We know this is just a basic law. If the orphans are minors, then we set up an apitropos, a person who's in charge of figuring out, each one as someone in charge of being there, having their power of attorney, as we would call it. Uborim lahem chelek yafeh. Okay, and each one tries to get a good portion for their orphan. Here comes what Shmuel says. But when they get older, I forgot to check. I believe here it's 20 usually when it comes to inheriting and land and all that. And usually it's 20. But anyway, they get older, whether it's 20 or some other age, they can say, you know what, I don't want this portion. It's very nice you got this for me, but this isn't what I wanted. I wanted the place with a good view. And the other one says, I don't want this. I want it in the valley. And okay. And each one, right, they can basically say, or one of them can say, I don't want this. And then they'll have to reshift once they're older, redivide the property. Rav Nachman didei, but Rav Nachman himself, after quoting this halach in the name of Shmuel, Rav Nachman disagreed and said, they cannot change what the apitropsim decided. Why? Because the apitropsim were appointed by the court. So if their authority came from the court, remember this line? What is the power of the court? If we start, we're going to undermine the whole power of the courts. If we start saying that whenever the orphans get older, they can just undo what the court ruled, it's not exactly the court ruled, but the court appointed the apitropos, and the apitropos got his portion, and maybe it was even done in court that the apitropsim divided it the way Rashi showed before. They each go into court, and say, and then it's a done deal. How can you go and undermine the power of the courts? People then will say next time, oh, the court divided something. That doesn't really mean anything. And you're going to create a whole problem in the system of people, right? If people don't believe in the courts, this came up, if you remember, uprooting Kiddushin, right? And it was a whole thing. What if that's where the uprooted Kiddushin came in? It was, what if there was this takana of Rabban Gamliel? What if people go against the takana? Is it nullified anyway? And then we said, well, if you say it's nullified anyway, then what's the power of the court? The Rabban Gamliel institute this takana, and we're just going against. Okay, and then through that, we got to have Kiddushin, a brooding Kiddushin. But anyway, it was in that famous sugya. So Rav Nachman says, you're going to undermine the power of the courts if you can just undo what they say. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. Does Rav Nachman really hold that the power of the courts we have to uphold under all circumstances, which is basically what it sounds like he's saying here? V'hatnan, it says in the Mishnah, let's start with basics. There's a law of onaah. If I overcharge you or undercharge you a sixth, more than a sixth, then the whole mekach is canceled. Okay? You can say that was a mistake. But if the judges evaluate something and they did less than a sixth of its value, or they valued it at more than a sixth of its value, and then, let's say there was someone who borrowed money and they didn't pay back the loan, and the court came and seized his property and says, this is assessed at the value of your loan, gave it to the malveh, and it turns out it was a sixth more, or was a sixth less. So what do we say? Laws of onaah apply to the court just as well. If we're going to undermine the court's evaluation, then we're going to undermine the courts in general. Big problem. Okay, same issue. And what's the relevance here? Well, Amar Rav Huna Brachin and Amar Rav Nachman halacha k'divrei chachamim. Well, Rav Nachman paskins like the rabbis who didn't say ma koch beit din yafeh. They didn't worry about the power of the court. They said they made a mistake. They made a mistake. So how does this jive with our sugya? Rav Nachman in our sugya says the children can't change their minds because it will undermine the power of the courts. But in the evaluation of the courts, you can't change. I'm sorry. He says you can change anything. Right? If they messed up, you can undo it. To which the Gemara says, very interesting answer, lo kashya, turning out Amabet, hadita'u, hadilota'u. In the case of Shoma Dayanim, it was a mistake. In the case of the children, it wasn't necessarily a mistake. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean it wasn't a mistake? If it wasn't a mistake, then why are the kids arguing about it? Why do they come later and say that's not what I wanted? Because they could say, listen, I didn't want that direction. I wanted the north instead of the south. I have other fields on the north side that are mine. And now I have to go all the way to the south side to get to my other fields now that I inherited. And it's just not convenient for me. So basically, we're going to distinguish with the kids. It's just a matter of preference. And there, Rav Nachman says, you can't undermine the power of the courts if it's just a matter of preference of the kids. The courts rule, here's your apitropos, you got your apitropos, that's it. It's done. Sorry, but can't turn that around. But if the judges made a mistake in calculation and evaluating what the value of the land is or what the value of whatever it is, that, of course, we're going to undo. Now, of course, there's machloket about that because that's not so clear. Because if you say the court made a mistake in one case, then people might say, oh, the court makes a mistake in general. And sometimes maybe you just have to swallow up mistakes of the court in order to keep the system going and have people respect the court. And this is a whole big fascinating issue in terms of, how much do we need to respect the courts and how much can we be critical of the courts? And, we've talked about this before, but it's what's going on in Israel right now about the court system and, people saying the courts are, they have their own agenda and we don't believe in the courts. And it's an issue that you can really see happening in front of our eyes. And it makes sense also, even if it wasn't happening in front of our eyes, the fact that, there's this debate about, do we let the court, even if they make mistakes, because people have to have respect for the court, or is it less respectful for the court if we, right, and to a certain extent, if we let the court mistakes go through, people are going to have actually less respect for the court. So you can see how it could go both ways. There's a lot to be said for this, but we're going to go on. Now that we're already on the topic of children and inheriting their father's property, now we're going to have more about this and onaah. So before now, we had two different topics, and now we're going to talk about sort of an overlap of them. We talked about the courts evaluating things and making mistakes within laws of onaah, and basically saying perhaps there's no laws of onaah for the court. And then we talked about kids distributing property and them not liking something, let's say wanting something on the other side. But now Rabbi Nachman comes and says, when they divide the property, it's as if each one purchased their property from the other siblings. So what's the relevance of this? Well, that means that laws of onaah kick in. Okay, that means now we're going to learn all the laws of onaah. If it's less than a sixth of a discrepancy, okay, so let's say it was there was a smaller difference, okay? They overpaid, one got more, a 12th more than the other. So nikne mekach. Okay, well, that's just, it's done. Okay, it's not a big enough mistake to change anything. Yeter al shtut, if it was more than a sixth of discrepancy, batela mekach, then everything goes back to the beginning, they start again redividing. Shtut, if it's exactly at a sixth, kana umachzir onaah. The kinyan is good, everyone gets their portion, but the one who got a six more has to return that value to one of the let's say it's two brothers, to the other brother. Rava. Now, Rava is going to go into the three statements that Rav Nachman just made, the three cases he just brought, and limit them each. So, the fact that we said less than a sixth, it's acquired. That's only, so if we divided our land, you and me, between us, and we made a mistake at less than a sixth, so we leave it. But if I appointed a messenger to go instead of me to the day that we divided up the property, and my messenger, okay, now we're back to laws of messengers. If I made a messenger and then there was a discrepancy of a 12th, let's say, Amre, I could say when the messenger gets back and say, this is what I got for you. And I say, but that's a 12th less than my brother got. Well, I could say to my messenger, and we've seen this before, I sent you to do something helpful for me, not to mess things up for me. And therefore, in the end, I can cancel that shlichut and say, what you did for me isn't what I wanted, and you can go yourself and redivide it. Now, you might say that seems unfair. You sent a shaliach, too bad. But the fact is, you can say, I sent you to do something good for me, and therefore, this doesn't work for me. Hada amaran yeter mishtupatel mekach. Rava continues and says, okay, Rav Nachman, you said more than a shtut, the whole thing is canceled. Lo amaran ela de lo amar naflagina mashuma de beidina. That's only if you didn't say we're going to go according to the court's evaluation. That's if the children evaluated themselves or went to a local guy to evaluate the land. Then if they made a mistake, they made a mistake. But if they said we're going to divide up our property based on what the court assesses the value at, and the court messed up, well, we already know this is a machloka between the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rava obviously holds by Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. He says in Keimakot Beidin Yafeh, and therefore it's not going to go back. There's no laws of onaah. So Ditnan Shuma Dayanim, we're just reviewing what we saw before. Shapichatu Shtut or Tiru Shtut was over or under a sixth. Michram Batel. Rashba Gomer Michran Kayam. Now, what's interesting about this is Rava is limiting the words of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, we know, holds like the rabbis in this case and thinks that even in the court it would be undone. So Rava here is just disagreeing with Rav Nachman and says, I know you said this, but I don't think that this would be true if they accepted the court's evaluation, because once the court says it, it's a done deal because he holds like Rashba. Third thing he says, if it's exactly at a sixth difference, okay, there was less than a six, more than a six. What if it's at exactly a six? Then it's acquired, but machzir onaah. But one of the brothers has to return the extra that they got. Lo amaran ela b'metaltali. This whole thing is only in movable items. Aval b'mekarkei ein onaah l'karkaot. But if we're talking actually about dividing land, there's no laws of onaah by land. Why is that? Because land, as we know, anyone in real estate knows this, right? Land fluctuates tremendously in value, right? Items you buy in a store are not going to fluctuate too much, although sometimes it surprises me that when you go to one supermarket and the same item could be sold, the exact same item, same company, same brand, same packaging, everything could be sold for a lot more in a different store. So I don't know about that, but generally in metaltalin, the prices are more clearly set. Whereas when it comes to land, it really fluctuates in value, and therefore there is no onaah. You can't say, oh, I paid too much for this land. So this whole thing about it being exactly at a sixth, and you'd have to just return the extra money, right, that you would have to return that, doesn't apply to land. And not only that, but he says, well, it depends how you divided the land. And now we're going to see that there could be onaah by land in this case. How would that be? Ela de plug bi'iluya. Ava plug b'mishchata lo. If you divide it by value of land, like for example, we've learned before that there's ziburit, benonit, and idit. Remember this from the 5th chapter of Gittin? There's poor quality land, that's called ziburit. There's benonit, average land, and then there's idit, which is the best quality land. Now, if we divide up our father's property, and some of the lands are a very high quality land, and whoever's going to get those is obviously going to get a smaller portion, right? And we'll evaluate, okay, this is $100,000 worth of, of our father's good land. And then the other brother's going to get the ziburi, the poor land, but much more of it, and that'll be valued at $100,000, let's say, okay? And so on. If we did it like that, then there's no onaah, because it's all a matter of evaluating what the value of those properties are. It's very hard to figure out, and it could fluctuate. But if you did it b'mishchata, if it was all, let's say, Benoni land, it doesn't matter which land, I'm just using it as an example. It was all average quality land, but same quality land, whatever it was. And how did we divide it? We measured it. And we measured, you got 50 by 50, I got 50 by 50, right? Whatever it is, okay? Now, if you did it b'mishchata, then you don't say there's no loss of onaah, because derive, as Rava said, if it's measuring, which is our case, if it's weighing, or if it's minyan, counting, like we have 20 of the same items of our parents, and then we just divide them up evenly. I get 10, you get 10. And let's say we messed up and I got 11 and you got 9. Okay. So anything like that, let's say it's land, okay, or whatever it might be, all of that, if there were, let's say they had a coin collection and I took 10 coins and I took 11 coins and you took 9 coins. And then, you say, well, it's not a 6th difference, right? You didn't get a 6th. I didn't get a 6th more than you did, but you say, but it's b'minyan. You got 11 and I got 9. That's unfair. Then we return it, okay? Even though it's not onaah. So those are exclusions to the rule. So basically what Rava comes and says on the third case is, number one, it doesn't apply to land, but it does apply if the land was divided by measuring. Because if we made a mistake in the measurement, that's not onaah at all. Doesn't fall into the category of onaah, which would then mean there's an exclusion of land. That's just poor workmanship, and that we're going to fix. Okay, so what we did in this section was we first started with, since we mentioned the yatomim, since we had that pasuk nasiacha, which taught us about orphans and apitropsim, then we went into orphans and apitropsim. What if the orphans don't like what the apitropsim did? Rav Nachman said, right, that they can change their minds later. They can't change their minds because we brought this other source where Rav Nachman seems to paskin that we don't care about imkei makoch beitin yafeh, and then we said one was a mistake, one wasn't a mistake. And then we went to this other, all the laws of onaah by children who divide up the inheritance. Rav Nachman gave the 3 basic rules of onaah, said they apply here, and then Rava limited them in each case. Each one he limited to a certain extent. Again, not necessarily Rav Nachman agrees with him about this, certainly not for the middle one, because it goes against Rav Nachman's psak about the Rashbag Chachamim Machloket, but in general, Rava limits what Rav Nachman said. Now we're going to move to a very fascinating topic what the topic is called Ein Shaliach Lidvar Avera. Ein Shaliach Lidvar Avera means, even though I can send you to do things for me, and you basically operate as me, okay, so when you do it, you're basically me. But if I tell you to do a sin, okay, then who gets punished? You, not me. Okay, and a lot has been written on this topic. You can read articles about it, find out all sorts of interesting things. Is it, right? Some people say actually there's a distinction. Is it that you just don't get that I don't get punished, but maybe I did do something wrong, or did I do nothing wrong and it's all on you? Now, why is that? We're going to see in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to say, because God tells you something and I tell you something, so who are you going to listen to, right? When I was little, it was always, someone tells you to jump off the Empire State Building, would you do it? Right. So just because I told you doesn't mean that you should do it. So basically, that's your fault. You have a brain, you have a mind, you understand what the ramifications are, and you did it anyway. You should have said to me, oh, that's forbidden. I won't do that. But you did it anyway, right? This is like assassins, let's say, who are hired by people. It's also a good question. Who's responsible? Like who does the court hold responsible? So anyway, that's our topic. So let's start and we'll read it inside. We'll only get to the beginning today. The Mishnah says, if I have this burning coal or a torch or something, and I give it to someone who doesn't have the sense to know what to do with it, and they burn your clothes with it, let's say. So I'm not responsible. Okay, they're not responsible because they're minors, so you can't hold them liable. And I'm not liable because I didn't do it myself. They did it. It was indirect damage, and you're not liable for that. But chayab b'dinei shamayim. God will punish me because it really is my fault. Okay, but you can't punish me in court because I didn't actually do something. Shilach biyad pikach, but if I sent it with you and I told you, this is even if I told you, go burn, Mark's clothes, pikach chayav. It's your responsibility, okay? Because it wasn't me, which I told you to burn Mark's clothes, but you in the end burnt Mark's clothes, so it's your fault. Why would we do this? Why would we say this? Why don't we say, you are a messenger of me, and you just did what I was intending to do. So if you can betroth, get betrothed for me, then also this. So the Gemara answers, here you see it in the words, that's what it means. There's no shlichut when it comes to sinning. As we say, if God is telling you to do something, or the student is telling you, right, the Rav or the student, which means God or your fellow fellow human, divrei mishamim, who you're supposed to listen to. Obviously, you're supposed to listen to what God told you. So it was your fault for listening to me rather than listening to God. To which the Gemara asks a very strange question. Okay, I'll tell you why it's strange in a minute, but they're going to ask a question from meila. Now, the problem, what's meila? Meila is misuse of consecrated property. And here the laws are different. And we're going to see that if I send you to do something with my money that was sanctified, and you spend my money that's sanctified in the way that I asked you to do it, I'm actually liable. Okay, that's what we're going to read right now. Shaliach, shelo asa shlichuto, shaliach ma'al. If I send you to the store to buy milk with my money, and I didn't remember that it was sanctified money, that I had taken, let's say, my, something I had that was sanctified, and I redeemed it onto money, and now the money has sanctity to it. So I send you to the store to buy milk. If you buy apples with it instead of milk, then shaliach ma'al. Then you're no more my shaliach. You didn't do what I asked you to do, even though I asked you to spend the money, but I asked you to spend it on milk, not on apples. So it's your responsibility, and you're going to be the one punished for this. But if you did the shlichut, then it's my fault because I sent you to do it, and you did it on my wishes. So why don't we say there's no shliach lidvar vera? It's a bit of a strange question, and the Gemara is going to answer it in a different way and say why we don't learn from here. But it's weird because here the whole idea is divrei rav, divrei mishamim, and you didn't even know you were doing anything wrong. I didn't know we were doing anything wrong. It's very different. It's not the same as our examples that we brought before. So commentaries ask this question. Some people say divrei rav, divrei tamid is just like a way of understanding the concept, but really it's applicable across the board. And anyway, it's a good question why they use meila as an example. But anyway, they now say shana meila diapa chet mitruma. Well, it says chet by truma, and it says chet here, and we know there's a gzera shava here. So what do we learn? Well, we learned by truma that your shaliach could do truma for you. So therefore, we learned that your shaliach could do meila for you. What does it mean your shaliach do meila for you? Your shaliach can sin for you, meaning the sin is on you. So mat truma m'shaveh shaliach, af meila shaveh shaliach. Even though meila is a sin, there's a special pasuk that's telling you there's a din of shlichut. To which they say, okay, well, if we have this case of meila, where the Torah is teaching you there's a law of shlichut, where there's a sin involved, nelef mina, why don't we learn from here? This should build a paradigm for all these other cases. To which the Gemara says, no, b'shum dahavi meila v'shlichut yad shnei ktuvim habeim ke'echad. V'chol shnei ktuvim habeim ke'echad ein melamdim. Because we have two cases, we've learned this so many times in our Masechet already, we have two cases where there's a shaliach for a sin. One is meila and one is shlichut yad, which we'll talk about in a second. And since that's the case, kol shnei ktuvim habeim ke'echad ein melamdim. Therefore, you don't build them as a paradigm. That means only in these two cases and not anywhere else. So meila hadam maran, that's our case. And shlichut yad maihi, what's the case? Shlichut yad is that if I am watching your item and then I claim it was stolen, I can take an oath and say it was stolen and I'm not responsible. And then I'm not responsible. As long as I didn't use the item I was watching. I'm not allowed to use an item I'm watching. If I used it in any way, then I'm liable. Okay? And then I don't get out of paying it. So now, shlichut yad, what's the case? Ditanya. So a little background first. I'll call the Baal Pesha. Seems to be adding something extra in this pasuk on any pesha. This is about, your responsibility for watching someone's item. Beit Shammai omrim lechayev ala machshava k'maaseh. Beit Shammai says this means that if I thought to be sholeach yad, even though I didn't, I thought to use your item, that's enough. Thought, there's always a machloket when it comes to thought. Does it mean you expressed your thought? Or does it mean you didn't? Because this is coming from the word devar pesha, it sounds like you expressed your wishes to use the item. Okay, just by expressing your wishes to use the item, or maybe even just thinking in your head, you're already liable. Okay, and then you won't get out of the payment here if it was stolen from you or something like that. Beit Hillel omrim eino chayav ad sheyishlach bo yad. Beit Hillel says, what are you talking about? Until you actually mishalech yad. Thoughts alone, you're not responsible for. Shenemar lo shalach yado. It says you have to say, this is part of what you have to promise, that I didn't do anything. You didn't say I didn't think to do anything. So now we're going to have each one saying, why don't you agree with my pasuk, and what do you do with my pasuk? So Beit Shammai says to him, Halo ne'amal, kol dvar pesha. What are you going to do with that extra wording, though? That must be including something additional. Amru lem Beit Hillel Beit Shammai, Halo ne'amarim lo shalach yado melech harei. What are you going to do with the fact that it says you didn't do something? So just because you thought it, you didn't do anything. So Amru Beit Shammai le Beit Hillel, imkin al kol dvar pesha lamali. So their basic thing is, you're right. Lo shalach yado sounds like you did it, but then why does it say al kol dvar pesha? It must be including something additional. To which Beit Shammai says, Sheyachol, here comes what Beit Hillel responds, Sheyachol enli elahu. What al kol dvar pesha means, not only are you responsible, Amar la'avdo lishlucho minayin. What if you told your slave to use the item? Or what if you told a messenger to use the item, and they did, on your word? Minayin, that you're going to be chayav. Talmud Amar al kol dvar pesha. So now, according to Beit Hillel, what do you have? Al kol dvar pesha includes it by shlichut yad. There is shaliach lidvar avera. You can't appoint shliach to do a sin, and the sin will be on you. So now we have two cases, meila and shlichut yad, and that's why we don't learn from them to everything else. This is going to continue because the Gemara is going to say, okay, that only works on Beit Hillel. According to Beit Shammai, though, there's only one, meila. Why doesn't meila build the paradigm? And why do we really say ein shliach lidvar avera? So what they're saying is, even though there's logic to the concept of ein shliach lidvar avera, still the psukim seem to indicate otherwise. There's one case where it says it meila, and from meila you can learn for everything. For the Beit Hillel, we have two, and then you don't learn. But Beit Shammai, we're going to have to figure out. He'll come up with a different two, and this discussion will continue into tomorrow's daf. Wishing everybody a Gemar Chatima Tova, good fast, and we'll meet up on Tuesday after the fast. And like I said, the daf for tomorrow will be going up right after class today.